Hello everyone and welcome back to the Combat Carnivore, and if it's your first time, welcome to the Combat Carnivore. Make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure that you're supporting vets, make veterans great again, and we can save the world and veterans with steak, strangles, and stoicism. I'll get into that later, but I got to dive into this video right now because I stumbled upon it. I wasn't supposed to record this until next week. However, it was bothering me so much, my emotions were taking over, so I'm going to record this video. It's very disturbing. Please, I know it might kind of be sporadic at the beginning, but watch it into the end, and I think that you're going to see that the conclusion that we start to point to is extremely egregious and implicative of something so diabolical that I don't even want to say it. So let the video do the talking. Let's go ahead and look into it. Let's just start off right now with an Instagram reel that took me into a deep dive. So take it with a grain of salt at the beginning, but allow me to explain as time goes on. So here we go.
A junk food diet get really pronounced changes to the brain, areas of the brain that are highly relevant to mental disorders.
What changes in the brain? Junk food.
In particular, there's an area of the brain called the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus is
memory.
Yeah, it's really critical for learning, for memory, but also for mental disorders. Now, the thing that seems to really help the hippocampus to grow and to function is a protein called BDNF. When you feed junk food,
brain-derived nootropic factor,
to animals, it drops the level of BDNF. BDNF's like manure for the brain. It grows new nerve cells in the hippocampus.
Lisa's studies claim that junk food can shrink the hippocampus, one of the telltale signs of depression. So food and what we eat can cause depression.
This is what all of the evidence that we've generated over the last 5 years really suggests. We see that people with better quality diet are much less likely to have depression. People with unhealthy diet, lots of processed foods, they're more likely to have depression. Can I tell you about a really scary study where they took a group of sedentary but otherwise healthy blokes and they put them on a junk food diet on one.
When they say junk food, remember, this is going to play an important factor later. Junk food means processed food as well, right? So when we think of junk food, oftentimes we just think of like sugar, which it is, but junk food is high fat, high carb, ultra processed type diet, right? So it doesn't just have to be like a donut or a candy bar. Junk food would also be ultra processed seed oils and refined sugars, refined carbs, so on and so forth.
Week, and they found within 1 week the same sorts of deficits in memory and cognition that they see in the animal models that seem to be linked to the hippocampus.
For 1 week.
For 1 week.
So, in that study, she's saying putting people on a highly processed, ultra-processed diet with junk food within 1 week started to see cognitive decline, okay? And she talked about BDNF, we're about to get into that, and she talked about how our diet, it is shown that our diet affects our mental health. And this was a big disconnect for the longest time. We never realized as we ran this experiment of deciding to put seed oils, a bunch of other garbage into the human diet, that this could affect the physiological processes that conduct our mind, that conduct our thought process. Let me go ahead now and go dive a little bit further. Okay, and so I just start Googling things, right? And I like when the AI kind of sums it up and contradicts itself. So the amygdala is part of the brain that plays a key role in fight or flight response to danger. Okay? So what I'm trying to figure out is what's the response, like what's the ultimate roles between the hippocampus and other parts of the brain. So we lead to the amygdala, right? The amygdala is part of the brain that plays a key role in fight or flight response to danger, right? The amygdala is an almond-shaped structure that's involved in emotional processing and decision-making. When the amygdala perceives danger, it sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus, which triggers the release of hormones that prepare the body for fighting or fleeing. The amygdala also tells the hippocampus, the part of the brain that stores memories, to remember the stressful situation. The fight or flight response is one of the body's 3 most basic stress responses. Along with fight, freeze, and fawn. The goal of each response is to decrease in or evade danger and return to a calm state. Okay? And that's a very important distinction to make of what the amygdala does and what the hippocampus does. So we start to see right off the bat that the hippocampus has a direct relationship with our cognitive health and how we interact with the world. Okay? So let's move on. Oh, and this, I better read this. The amygdala can also trigger the fight or flight response even when not warranted. Okay? It seems unprecedented that we get these fight or flight. So this is like a panic attack. This is like a PTSD, panic-induced, out of nowhere response, which is known as an amygdala hijack, right? This can happen when the amygdala is overstimulated, causing anxiety to outweigh the logical parts of the brain, like the frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex, leading to panic, okay? So the amygdala can be triggered to start sending these fight or flight responses. And then what's weird is your hippocampus remembers this, and it said, okay, that must have been the trigger, and then starts remembering like false triggers that start to stimulate your panic, right? And this PTSD, when we deal with, right, prolonged periods of stress, certain things start to happen that we're about to get into right here. And so I asked, what is the effect of prolonged periods like PTSD, right? Prolonged periods of stress, and what does it do to the amygdala? Veterans and active duty service members who have combat-related PTSD and mild traumatic brain injuries, MTBI, may have larger amygdalas than people who only have MTBI. And so this was to say that people who have PTSD typically have a swollen amygdala, which means that this hijacking effect happens more often. The amygdala is an almond-shaped part of the brain's temporal lobe that is important for triggering PTSD symptoms. A study published in the Journal of Head Trauma Rehabilitation found that the amygdala's right and left sides were larger in people with PTSD and MTBI than people with only MTBI. Another study found that veterans with PTSD also show amygdala hyperactivity when they see threatening faces. So it makes sense, right? When you are in these chronically stressful situations that are going prolonged over and over and over, that's how it survived, right? And it almost needs to do that in order to continue its survival. And its hippocampus is constantly remembering all these triggers. But what's even weirder is as the amygdala becomes swollen with this hijacked effect, things that aren't even precedented, right, start to trigger that process, that snowball effect, and then the hippocampus starts to remember all this. So let's go ahead and dig even a little bit deeper. Let's see what I have right here. And then so we start getting into, okay, what happens to veterans, especially if they have PTSD when they've been, in combat? What happens to their hippocampus? So we know their amygdala becomes swollen, but what happens to their hippocampus? The hippocampus becomes smaller in veterans not recovered from PTSD. The hippocampus, a brain area associated with memory and stress, was about 6% smaller on average in veterans with current chronic PTSD than in veterans who had recovered from PTSD. So this is very interesting because when we look at World War I and World War II veterans, you see the effects of PTSD from right after the war. It's kind of peaked. And then they get better over time. Interesting about modern veterans is they get worse over time, right? So veterans, as I talk about a lot, there's 22 deaths a day from veteran suicide, all right? 8,000, over 8,000 a year. And what's even more interesting than that is over 5,000 of those 8,000 a year were from veterans who are 50 years or older. So this is telling me, and I'm not a medical professional, but that this is a chronic issue and that there's something different going on between World War I and World War II and the environment afterwards as compared to modern veterans and their response to PTSD and the environment afterwards. because the trend is different. This, I think, is a telltale sign, right? Is the fact that our hippocampus shrinks and it doesn't recover. Why is it not recovering? Let's go ahead and look into that a little bit more. Let's see what I have in here. This was the craziest rabbit hole for me. Okay, so now we're talking about more into the evidence of the hippocampal volume in chronic combat-related PTSD. Hippocampal volume was directly correlated with combat exposure, which suggests that traumatic stress may damage the hippocampus. Alternatively, smaller hippocampi volume may be a pre-existing risk factor for combat exposure and or the development of PTSD upon combat exposure. Now we have a predictive factor that we can look to see whether or not somebody will respond to chronic stress in combat, right? So let's go ahead now and dive deeper into my rabbit hole. She talked about BDNF, right? Which is brain-derived nootropic factor, right? And BDNF is, like she said, she called it manure, which is funny. But what she means is the fact that BDNF repairs, protects, grows neurotransmission in the brain. Like it grows your brain's ability to recover, to repair, right? And also protects it. So you start to look. BDNF stimulates and controls growth of new neurons from neural stem cells, and BDNF protein and mRNA have been identified in most brain areas, including the, I don't know how to say, the olfactory bulb, cortex, hippocampus, so on and so forth, the hypothalamus as well, which we talked about a little bit earlier. So we know that BDNF stimulates growth and a protective aspect in the hippocampus. And yet we know diet also influences the effects on our hippocampus. So that's very interesting. So we're sending our soldiers into these combat situations, right? So that's going to increase the size of the amygdala in response, and it's going to decrease the hippocampus. So we know this. And we know that diet affects this as well. Okay, so now let me go ahead and dive into diet. So now let's consider the diet that's given to our service members, right? And I can tell you, it's a bunch of garbage. It is a bunch of processed foods. When we look at MREs, okay, and let's go ahead, and by the way, this is the Army website, right? Army.mil. Soldiers inevitably experience changes in physical activity, environment, diet, and sleep patterns during operations. So not great. All right. And they even admit these changes may affect health and diversity in their gut microbiome. So they're already acknowledging that their environment messes with our gut. And by the way, where's 90% of our serotonin receptors are around 90%? It's in our gut. Our gut is our second brain, right? So these factors could ultimately compromise soldier health, readiness, and lethality. Okay, now we move on. During operations, soldiers often shift from eating their regular diets to eating military rations. So when they are in the most stressful of environments, when their whole body, their circadian rhythm, all this garbage is being dysregulated, they go on meals ready to eat, MREs. Contains similar amounts of carbohydrates, fat, and protein, and fiber. By the way, carbs and fiber are, don't even get me started on carbs and fiber and how bad they are for you. But in addition to that, let me just continue. The average American diet. How bad is the standard American diet? It's horrible for you, right? The amount of macros and ratios of those macros are so discombobulated that I already talk about this in other videos. But if I just had 1 minute to say that exogenous carbs, fiber, and ultra-processed foods is a horrible setup for our body's regulatory system, our metabolic system, our circadian rhythm, so on and so forth. And I get into the weeds a little on one of the last videos I just recorded, But this is bad, right? But what makes it even worse is that, unlike most diets, the MRE needs to withstand rough conditions and exposure to the elements while maintaining a 3-year shelf life. As a result, commercially sterile, highly processed items and no fresh food are used. It says it right here. They are giving our soldiers highly processed food, zero fresh food, high in carbs, high in fiber. Are you kidding me? That is junk food. That is junk food. And what did we learn from that last doctor in the interview? Junk food attributes to lower hippocampus size, right? Lower hippocampal volume. How do I say that? Decrease in hippocampal volume. We'll just say that. Okay. Leads to depression and dysregulation of the physiological processes in the brain. So not only does the diet do that alone, but the environment of being in the military does that to your brain. And of course, we're going to have to make sacrifices. We're going to have to make sacrifices being in the military, right? It's just the nature of the beast, right? At least they could do something to alter maybe the kind of diet that we're getting, because I'm telling you that DFAC food is not much better, and other ways that they feed us in the military are not very good, not very regulated, not very healthy. Okay? Regardless of what they want to tell you. Giving you a bunch of starches. I remember going through trainings all the time, eat your starches, blah, blah, blah. You need this for energy. Oh my God, all the BS that was told to us. They don't know any better, right? But right here, they do know better. They know that they're putting you on ultra-processed foods, and they also know what that's doing to your hippocampus. And we know that hippocampus has a direct correlation with mental disorders and cognitive health, cognitive function. This is where it gets even better. The Surgeon General's current policy allows the MRE to be consumed as the sole source of substance for up to 21 days. Earlier studies demonstrated that consuming the MRE for 21 days had no negative effects on soldier nutrition status. However, the question of whether subsisting solely on MREs could cause gut leakiness or other gastrointestinal symptoms and change the gut microbiome has not been considered. Okay, so this article was about gut microbiome. Everybody pretty much that I know who has joined around the same time that I did has anxiety problems, PTSD problems, depressive problems, any sort of cognitive problems, even schizophrenic problems. In addition to all that, they almost all have digestive issues, whether it's Crohn's, whether it's irritable bowel syndrome, right? Whether it's constipation, so on and so forth. They have pain. And I know that pain. I suffered chronically for 10 years with that pain. Mentally, physically, wanting to die. Okay? And we're seeing it right here. We're seeing it with the knowledge that we now know, the foundational concepts that we now know of what's going on in the brain, what's happening with the BDNF, and what's happening with the diet and the environment of soldier activity, of military servicemen and women, and the activities that they have to go through, and the type of diet that they're forced to be on. So this is lowering their BDNF levels, while at the same time, the stress is lowering their BDNF levels. It's also causing chronic stress, which is shrinking the hippocampus and inflaming, or causing the amygdala to become swollen, requiring more, requiring certain chemical interactions with the hippocampus. Okay, now let's consider another part of our military diet that no one likes to talk about: tobacco use. Tobacco, as we know, is a nightshade, is extremely inflammatory. Okay? So I asked the effect of tobacco on the hippocampus. It has a number of negative effects on the hippocampus, including hippocampal volume. Chronic cigarette smoking can lead to smaller hippocampal volumes, especially in young to middle-aged people. This effect can be exacerbated by age. One thing I know is most of the military, I shouldn't say most, from what I've experienced, a lot of the military is addicted to tobacco, and it doesn't go away, right? It gets worse over time often. And we see, as we talked about earlier, the chronic depression increases as age goes on, which suggests that it's a chronic issue. Hippocampal neurogenesis. So it even blocks your ability to grow your hippocampus after it's been damaged. Long-term tobacco. Hippocampal memory. It can impair working memory and object location memory in mice. Okay. Hippocampal activity. It gets worse and worse. Low concentrations of nicotine can enhance synaptic transmission in the hippocampus. It can cause overall brain shrinking, premature brain aging. Okay? So, I don't know if you guys remember being in the military. It says it affects short-term memory and long-term memory. But how many people do you know, or how many veterans do you know, or service members are currently addicted to nicotine or tobacco? Whether it be smoking, whether it be dipping, chewing, right? Let's talk about another addiction that we don't like to talk about, energy drinks. The effects of caffeine. And I know almost everybody I've ever come across in the military was addicted to caffeine. It was almost a brag. How many monsters have you had today? How many? I'm running on like 3 monsters. It was like this big brag. And I shouldn't isolate Monster, but whatever it be, Red Bulls, whatever energy drink, it shows neurodegenerative changes. Energy drinks, especially those high in caffeine and sugar, have negative effects on the hippocampus. Neurodegenerative changes, right? Caffeinated energy drinks can cause neurodegenerative changes on the hippocampus. It decreases neuronal thickness, okay? These changes can be more severe with longer periods of intake. Again, chronic. Decreased gray matter volume. Frequent caffeine consumption can reduce gray matter volume in the hippocampus and other areas of the right medial temporal lobe. Disturbed neuronal morphology, affects short-term memory. Energy drinks can also cause the brain to release more dopamine, which has led to addiction. However, the more often someone consumes energy drinks, the less pleasure they experience from the dopamine response. Depression, right? Like definitive depression. Okay, so what are you doing? It's like almost encouraged in the military to get on these things. When you go, it's so funny, you go to like certain bases, you go to certain forts and posts and things like that, and energy drinks are like in the vending machines. They're being sold like crazy. They're being encouraged. And then they go to convenience stores a lot of the time because they don't have time to go somewhere else, and they just get a bunch of processed food and energy drinks. They run on caffeine. Okay, and now there's something that we kind of talk about, but not nearly enough, is alcohol consumption. For good Lord, the amount of alcohol use and abuse amongst military members and amongst veterans is something we don't like to go face to face, but it is a problem. Okay? And by the way, I'm not dissing, of course I'm a military member, but we just know that a lot of military members self-medicate. Okay? And we know that alcohol use is pretty big amongst military members. I'm not trying to say anything negative here about like people in the military are inherently bad for this and that and the other thing. We just know that alcohol use amongst military members is high and amongst veterans is high. Alcohol can have several effects on the hippocampus, including, once again, hippocampal volume reduction, memory blackouts, neurogenesis disruption, and hippocampal circuitry, white matter reductions, and neuronal loss in the hippocampal, I don't even know this, amonic fields, and I'm not even qualified to read whatever that was. Obviously not good, right? So, energy drinks, tobacco, alcohol, 3 main staples amongst military culture and intake, along with the fact that most of what they eat is processed foods that are given to them by the military. And in addition to that, they're usually all Americans on the standard American diet, which is junk food, processed food, ultra-processed food. And we know all this affects your brain activity. And as we learn from the doctor, your hippocampus, which has a direct relation, again, with cognitive health and effects on depression, anxiety. Now, let's move on to where this starts getting very, very interesting. As we know, BDNF stimulates and controls growth in new cells, right? We need BDNF. And BDNF comes from things like exercise, but it also comes from things I don't think a lot of people realize when it comes to diet. So let's go ahead and look into this. So if not only diet affects your hippocampus, but it also affects BDNF. Yes, BDNF may play a role in hippocampal growth and volume. BDNF is a neurotrophin that promotes growth, differentiation, and survival of neurons. It also regulates synaptic plasticity throughout the brain, including the hippocampus. And we talked about exercise. Exercise can increase BDNF expression in the hippocampus. Higher aerobic fitness levels are also associated with larger hippocampal volumes. Okay? It makes sense. Our ancestors, they did a lot of anaerobic and aerobic exercises. Okay? BDNF and other factors. Other factors may affect BDNF levels and hippocampal growth include dietary restriction, may enhance neuronal growth of the hippocampus. So I'm going to get into that a little bit with fasting. Stress, chronic or unpredictable stress may decrease BDNF levels in the hippocampus, which we talked about earlier, of the environment typically of a soldier or serviceman or woman. Fasting, so restrictive diet. Fasting can increase levels of BDNF, a protein that is important for brain health, and may improve cognitive function, learning, and memory. BDNF helps existing neurons survive and encourages the growth of neurons and synapses. It also promotes neuroplasticity and long-term potentiation, LTP, which can improve cognitive performance. Fasting can stimulate BDNF secretion because it's a form of stress. So we have to be very specific of what type of form of stress is either increasing BDNF or decreasing it, in addition to increasing the volume of the hippocampus or decreasing. So we have to be very cognizant of this. During fasting, the brain switches its fuel source from glucose to ketone bodies or lactate, which can promote BDNF production. Ketones reach peak levels about 12 hours after the last meal. Fasting can also upregulate GABA, which can induce the expression of genes that encode proteins involved in cellular stress adaptation, including BDNF. Okay, guys, what is a carnivore diet? You are in, and most people who do carnivore diet go fasting and feasting. They don't eat, constantly and all the time. People start to understand that when you're constantly eating, you're causing a lot of energy and effort of your body. Digestion is a main tax on the body, and never giving it a break, especially inflammation with junk food and ultra processed food, is very damaging to your metabolic health. And metabolic health is like the source we're starting to understand for so many problems, and inflammation is such a main source of so many chronic ailments. Okay, and so by giving it a break, by going just 12 hours without eating, we start to see increases in BDNF, okay? Which is weird because it's almost the exact opposite of everything that the nutritional sciences are starting to tell you, because they're like, they don't want to spike your insulin, so eat smaller throughout the day. And so now you're constantly eating and constantly digesting, which, by the way, digestion goes far beyond what we think, affecting sleep cycles, negatively affecting circadian rhythms, so on and so forth. So, that being said, we are not getting nearly enough BDNF activation in our day-to-day lives. However, carnivore not only does fasting and feasting, but it puts you on ketones, okay? And ketones have a positive correlation with BDNF production. Weird, because this is known, but it's not advertised to us at all when we go to the VA, right? And we'll get into that here in a bit. Ketones, specifically beta hydroxybutyrate, BHB, may increase BDNF expression. BHB is a chemical that the liver produces naturally and builds up in the brain and body during exercise, also fasting. When animals exercise, they break down fat for energy instead of using sugar stores. All right, which produces ketones as a byproduct. All right, BHB can trigger biological reactions that activate the BDNF gene, which then produces more of its protein. This may improve neuronal bioengineerics and neuroprotection. Okay, so we see that ketones are a benefit. Yet they're still giving you a bunch of carbs, exogenous carbs, which keeps the insulin up, right? Which prevents you from accessing your energy stores, right? It's crazy. So we know this. We know this, yet we're sending soldiers over there, not on ketones, and we're trying to recover and repair soldiers, not on ketones. Now, this starts getting into the woods. Okay, so we talked about SSRIs a little bit earlier. So we have now established a pretty good foundation, right? And now this is where it starts getting into a little bit conspiratorial, okay? This is a part that I was asking you to wait for. SSRIs. When you go to the doctor, you say, I have PTSD. I am not doing very well. I have depression. I have anxiety. I have digestive issues. I don't know if I want to live that much longer. They tell you, please talk to someone, talk to someone. There are resources. Okay, I'm talking to the resources. I am depressed. I'm dealing with chronic issues. I have panic disorder, right? And it makes sense with all the environment and now what we know from the amygdala and the hippocampus, that relationship in the hypothalamus, or fight or flight. So we know this. We have a pretty decent, clear understanding of those relationships, those processes, those interactions. So I'm asking you, doctor, I'm asking you for help. This is the current intervention methods that are in play in our system. You are loved. The world is better with you in it. People care. Here's a drug. Here's an SSRI. Here is an antidepressant. Okay? That's what is in the medical literature, as far as I'm to understand it with talking to doctors. And if you don't give them an SSRI, you lose your medical license. They revoke it. And if you prescribe too much, same thing. They revoke your medical license. So very interesting. So they have very specific top-down orders on how to deal with this issue. Hasn't changed that much in 20 years. And as we shown in the last video, from 2001, since 9/11/2001 to 2021, all right, a study that was done over the 20 years, there was 7,057, I believe was the exact number, service men and women who died on the line of duty. However, as of 2021, so this was 3 years ago, and we know the numbers are atrocious, there was over 30,000 veteran suicides. You're 4 times more likely to die by your own hand than that of an enemy of the United States. Isn't that insane? We are much better and much more efficient at killing our own soldiers than our enemy is. I don't know what kind of flex that would be, but that is a weird statistic that people tend to just accept. Yet the intervention methods, they've had 20 years, they've had 23 years to make this better. With the knowledge for the past 15 years, as we saw, of the relationship of the hippocampus and the environment, knowing the effects of BDNF and its effects on the brain. We've known this. So let's start getting into the weeds here. Remember, every single day, 22 vets are committing suicide. 135 people are committing suicide. 1.6 million people a year attempting suicide. 68.7, I believe, 68%, I have to double check those numbers, of the people committing suicide are white males. Males are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women. Insane things. Hey, I want to commit suicide. What should I do? The world is better with you in it. The world is better with you in it. Here's an SSRI. Now let's look into the weeds of the SSRIs. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, are generally effective in treating depression symptoms. Now I'm going to question that. It's a generally effective. That's a broad term. But they don't work for everyone. According to a 2023 article, the treatment response rate for SSRIs ranges from 40 to 60%. And by the way, this is an AI overview. You can get into the weeds. You can get way down a rabbit hole on this. 40 to 60% treatment response. It's a very interesting word because that shows that less than half the people that take it, and at best, less than 2/3 of the people who take it have a response. Now, remission rates are 30 to 45%. Okay? So it's like, hey, this will put you into remission. This will help treat, right? This drug will help treat your symptoms, less than half likely. As a matter of fact, in a worst case scenario, less than a third of you will see remission. Less than a third. They're giving this to veterans who have expressed that they want to commit suicide. Knowing these statistics, okay? And just 30% of people, according to a study, it just doesn't work at all. And it gets worse than that. Let's move on. I asked, can you get addicted to selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the SSRIs and antidepressants? Can you get addicted? Okay? Answer gets a little wobbly here because addiction has certain specific scientific semantics, very specific terminology required to define it as an addiction, right? Because we get into the weeds here again on physical addiction. It gets convoluted when it comes to what a physical addiction entails, right? So then they have to say something like a dependence. Okay, now, you're going to love this. Yes, SSRIs can cause dependence. It's unlikely that people will become addicted to them. Dependence is a state of adaptation that it can occur when someone takes a drug frequently. When someone stops taking SSRI suddenly, they may experience withdrawal symptoms, I know I did, which can cause nausea, dizziness, lethargy, flu-like symptoms, vomiting, cramps, diarrhea, loss of appetite, sweating, and flushing, and a lot of other things that I've heard people talk about when I've spoken with them, such as like hallucinations, right? Schizophrenia, things of this nature. However, SSRIs don't cause other features of addiction, which, as we talked about, they have to meet certain requirements here. Okay? To me, that sounds like an addiction, but of course, we have to follow the semantics. So, I'm suicidal. Please help me. The world is better with you in it. Here's an SSRI. It works like less than half the time. You go into remission about less than a third of the time, depending on what study you look at. And you're going to be dependent on it. And if you quit it, you're going to go through withdrawal symptoms. And you being dependent on a drug is a very profitable thing for the medical industry. And we're going to get into that. This gets really, this really works me up. Not only does it not work a lot of the time, it has the opposite effect. Can antidepressants cause depression? In October 2004, the FDA placed a black box warning on antidepressant medications after research studies found an increased risk of suicidal thoughts and behaviors amongst children and teens. The FDA issued the same warning to young adults 2 years later. The FDA based this decision on clinical trials that showed study participants with major depressive disorder and other mental health conditions had increased suicidal thoughts and behaviors when taking antidepressants. So not only does it not work a lot of the time, enough of the time, it causes you to act on suicidal thoughts. It makes your depression worse. How is this the best intervention method? And how has it been the intervention method that hasn't been changed or modified or updated in any significant way for the past 20 years, while knowing you're 4 times more likely to commit suicide than you are to die on the line of duty? This is the intervention method for our veterans, for our very best, the ones who sacrifice their lives and their health and their bodies in the name of freedom, okay? This is why I think this is the best we have for them. In 2017, the Department of Veterans Affairs spent about $4.8 billion on prescription drugs for outpatient care. Okay? That's insane. In 2021, the VA spent an estimated $14,750 per veteran patient which is similar to Medicare spending per beneficiary in 2020. So, billions of dollars by giving veterans drugs, when we know we have effective methods that don't involve drugs. And we know that diet negatively affects the hippocampus, causing depression, cognitive decline. According to EIN Presswire, in 2019, 1.75 million veterans enrolled in VA health services were prescribed antidepressants. A 2021 Statista graph, I don't know how to say that, sorry, also showed that 75%, 3/4, okay, 3 in 4 veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan were prescribed medications for service-related injuries. They were taking antidepressants. So not only were they taking other prescriptions, 3 out of 4 of them were also taking antidepressants. Okay, multiple medications. In addition to the fact that we're not even accounting for how many people were prescribed antidepressants who aren't on other medications. Very interesting. And I can guess what a lot of those other prescriptions were. Chronic pain, digestive issues, right? We're starting to see a trend here where diet affects inflammation. Diet affects the gut. You know, the environment, which we can't control when it comes to war, affects the gut. But it's like a perfect storm, right? All in one. And you're not making it better when they come home. You're making it worse, in my opinion. The VA prescribes SSRIs, all right? And other, right, SNRIs, so on and so forth. Look at all these. That's what they're allowed to give, which does not have very good results. And actually, in a lot of the time, has negative results. And then, on top of that, makes you dependent on it, making you physically ill when you get off of it. Now it starts to get a little bit more terrifying here. Companies and industries in the United States lobby government officials to influence legislation and regulation. We know this. We know that money, right, people with deep pockets, influence our lawmakers, right, to regulate us a specific way. The way we write laws, the way we exercise laws, the way we protect laws. The pharmaceutical and health products industry spent the most on lobbying from 1998 to 2023, reaching a total of more than $5.8 billion. $5.8 billion. While people are starving, while people are suffering, these people have spent billions of dollars influencing lawmakers, influencing our regulatory system. What's required? What are the only drugs that these doctors are allowed to prescribe? What's considered safe and not safe? What are our competitors doing? Make sure that we don't allow that to happen. Or as a matter of fact, let's go ahead and start advertising these drugs and also to discredit the people who do things that are more homeopathic. And you know what's even more interesting is insurance companies. Insurance companies, right? And I've gotten into the weeds on this on my Food is Corrupt video. How food companies, hospitals, insurance companies, and drug companies, they're all in bed together, okay? They all are feeding the cycle. You're on the wheel. You know what I mean? You eat shitty food. Okay, so you have to go to the doctor. You can't afford the doctor, so you need the insurance, right? And the insurance then, because of the way the system is, the medical system can overcharge now because you have insurance, all right? And then they give you drugs. And the drugs are in bed with the food companies, and you go back and forth on this wheel, this pendulum. It's terrifying. And what's even more is that they're all incentivized and subsidized. Not only are you paying for insurance, your tax dollars are paying for insurance, and it's subsidized. And it's a for-profit industry. So they are making billions of dollars, so much so that they can spend billions of dollars to write your laws. It's very interesting. And who's almost guaranteed, as we looked in their last videos, to come back from the military with depression? We saw that statistic. I believe it was 4% and 44%. 4% of people had serious depressive thoughts and acting on them and suicidal thoughts before going into the military. Over 44% after. And those numbers get worse over time. Depression gets worse chronically over time. Spending more than $5.83 billion in those years, the industry has far outpaced all others in lobbying spending. The industry spent a record of $379.44 million lobbying in 2022. And I'm a conspiracy theorist, I guess, by saying that, but it's right there, okay? Food companies and other food-related industries spend money lobbying to influence legislation and regulations that affect their business, all right? And these businesses spent $523 million lobbying in Congress over the past 5 years, which is more than big oil or defense contractors. Food companies are more corrupt than you realize, and they're more influential, and you don't really think of it because like big oil and defense contractors, so on and so forth. You know that they have lobbying groups. But your food, the thing that keeps you healthy, the thing that keeps you energized, the thing that keeps you regulated, food, has become an addictive, profitable industry. Ultra-processed foods. And what's even worse is the nutritional industry has been hijacked, corrupted, and owned and monopolized by religiously anti-meat groups. I didn't want to say the other word, but religions. Okay? Are you starting to see this relationship, right? It's not just me. It's right here. Okay? You can Google this. That's why I do this channel. I'm just doing basic Googling. I'm doing basic research that's provided on the internet. These are facts. These are numbers you can go look up. These are reports. This is information that you can look up. This includes spending on behalf of drug manufacturers as well as sellers of medical products and nutritional and dietary supplements. The main drug makers lobbying group, Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, remained the biggest spender within the healthcare sector in 2023 with outlays of $27.6 million. 1,845 are the number of pharmaceutical/health product lobbyists in the United States. 1,845 people are lobbyists. There are 1,845 people employed to influence your laws and the way that we live, the food, the nutrition, and drugs that we use, that we're not allowed to use, that are marketable, that are legal or illegal. 1,845,000 people have jobs lobbying the United States government. And you know what's even weirder? 58.64 are former government employees. The pharmaceutical/health industry is also top spender in political campaigns. All right. With contributions reaching a total of $89.09 million in 2020. This was an 170% increase from the decade earlier. The industry's top lobbying priorities over the past few decades include, and I guess I didn't include that for whatever reason, but do you guys see what's happening here? This is no small feat. This is no something to sweep under the rug. And this is why we were so happy with Robert Kennedy, RFK Jr. He was the one who was talking about that our food system is corrupt. And it's one of the most important things that nobody's talking about. And now he is talking about that. He's bringing it to light. Thank goodness we have a presidential candidate, right, who is backing RFK in those initiatives and wants to do something about it. This is atrocious. And now we're going to start getting more right here into what's terrifying, right, in the conspiracy realm, in the conspiratorial realm. Now, this is the moment that you've been waiting for. Okay, this is the conspiracy aspect of this. And so I want you to take this all with a grain of salt, but just look at everything we've looked at. Look at the foundation we've laid. Look at how much money is in the weirdest places, and the places that we shouldn't expect to see all this money, but we in fact do, and it makes sense. So now we're getting into the deep part of the conspiracy theory. Okay? This is something that was brought to my attention. All right? And take it with a grain of salt. However, it seems a little weird, especially as we look at where all the numbers are at. We look at the foundation, right? We look at the foundation that we've set in understanding our understanding of the amygdala, the hippocampus, BDNF, what affects that, diet, environment, so on, things we can and cannot control, the fact of SSRIs, so on and so forth, being not effective. This is interesting here. Since 2001, between 1.9 and 3 million service members have served in post 9/11 war operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Many have been wounded or injured and suffer from conditions ranging from brain injuries and hearing loss. From 2001 to 2020, federal spending on veteran care has doubled from 2.4% to 4.9% of the budget. The cost of caring for post 9/11 war vets will reach between $2.2 and $2.5 trillion by 2050. So this is interesting. So this right here is going to validate the fact that this is a chronic issue, where in the past it wasn't. World War I and World War II vets were not dealing with this, most of which has not yet been paid. The commitment to veterans continues long after wars end. Those who have been deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq are entitled to free or subsidized medical treatment for the rest of their lives. In addition, a significant percentage of them are eligible to receive lifelong compensation for disabilities stemming from their wartime service, as they should. Veterans of the current wars are also entitled to a certain educational, housing, training, and other benefits funded by the government agencies outside of the VA. Historically, the cost of caring for veterans, for war veterans, rises for several decades and peaks 30 to 40 years or more after conflict, right? Showing this is chronic, all right? We get worse over time, and then veterans' needs increase with age, as, especially health goes down and decreases. This will be especially true for veterans of the current wars who are already utilizing VA medical services and applying for disability benefits at much higher rates than previous wars. Finally, there are significant other costs that will be borne by these veterans and their families. Family members of the injured are often give up their jobs to become unpaid caregivers, and self-employed service members lose income. Although the U.S. has promised care for veterans throughout their lives, the magnitude of the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans' costs is grossly understated in government projections. There is no provision set aside to cover for these future obligations, and thus the U.S. risks shortchanging its veterans. So the key findings of this: the cost of caring for war veterans peaks 30 to 40 years after the conflict, but there are no provisions to cover these future obligations in current wars. Future medical and disability costs for Iraq and Afghanistan will be between $2.2 trillion and $2.5 trillion. That's a lot of money that people want to get their hands on. Uncompensated costs include loss of income for injured veterans and their family caregivers and diminished quality of life. Also meaning that you're now not able to tax those people because they're not working. Recommendations for helping with this. So this is where the conspiracy is really in line. Basically, drug companies, which are the most influential in government right now, according to how much money they're spending on government, make a lot of money off of veterans. They make a lot of money making it like one of the only things that doctors can prescribe to people who are suicide ready. Remember, that's a current intervention method. The world is better with you in it. Here's an SSRI. We know that those don't work very well, and we know that they can actually have an opposite effect. And it's chronic. It gets worse over time. And so this is good because now the drain that veterans have on the system, which is estimated to be this amount, it's already a huge drain, right? When I say drain, don't take that. We're just talking by like literal definition. Right? So they are now incentivized almost to make sure that your life ends. Right? The more veterans are committing suicide, and if we looked at that study from 2001 to 2021, that's over 30,000 veterans. And remember, we have about 8,000 veterans committing suicide each year. So that was 3 years ago, right? So that's 24,000, right? So let's go ahead, and I won't get too much in the weeds on the math, but let's just say 30,000. 30,000 veterans that you no longer have to pay funds for, that are no longer a drain on the economy. Okay? So the ones that aren't committing suicide are still paying, or rather not paying, but let me say that again. So the ones that don't commit suicide are dependent on the drugs, right? And the ones that do commit suicide save the government money. It's like they're in a rush to get you on the drug. They're looking for any excuse to get you on the drug. And what's weird is those numbers are atrocious. Like the effectiveness, the efficacy of SSRIs and antidepressants is egregious, especially if you consider that's the primary intervention method. That's the primary prescription. That's a primary way of caring for these people. All right, for men, for people all over the United States, but especially for our veterans. This is the best that you've had, and this is the best that you've had that after 20 years of being the main provider of care for 20 years, over 20 years. This is what you got. This is what you're doing. It's, oh my gosh, I can't believe that we accept this. While at the same time, we know diet has a positive effect. All right, every single person that I've come across to that has been coached by me has gotten better. Okay, in a relatively short time, in a few weeks, ketone bodies produced by the ketogenic diet may help with depression in a number of ways. Mitochondrial function, which I don't have time to get in right now, but mitochondrial dysfunction has been majorly linked to depression, and probably we already know actually the decrease in the size of the brain in the hippocampus, the lack of mitochondrial efficacy. And we know that the more mitochondria we have and the more efficacy each one of those gets to perform at, okay, the more efficient each one of those mitochondria perform at, increases cognitive function. We know this. Guess what? Ketosis, ketones, all right? Ketones cross the blood-brain barrier, especially when glucose can't. When we hit a point where our brains become insulin resistant, what then are you giving your brain if not ketones? You're giving it inflammation. You're giving it malnutrition, okay? Studies have shown, again, and by the way, we can read all this, but I'm running out of time. Some studies have shown that the keto diet can help with depression, including these other studies, right? So not random studies. Stanford medicine study, okay? The NCBI study, okay? A study published in the Frontiers in Psychology found that ketone bodies can change the brain's cellular energy status, which may help with depression. Okay, helps with generalized anxiety disorder 7 weeks following a personalized animal-based ketogenic diet. And Stanford medicine study found that the keto diet improved psychiatric conditions in people with serious mental illness, with participants improving 31% on a psychiatrist rating scale. That's significant with just food, and it's not even full carnivore. Okay, and now let's go directly to PTSD. PTSD. Cerebral energy deficits. Ketones may help combat these deficits, which can be caused by TBIs, inflammation and oxidative stress, and neurodegeneration. Ketones may help reduce these factors, which can also be caused by TBI. Physical problems. A ketogenic diet, which is low in carbohydrates and high in fat, may help balance out some of the physical problems that PTSD sufferers experience. Psychiatric conditions. A small clinical trial led by the medicine that we just talked about helps stabilize the brain and improve psychiatric conditions for people with serious mental illness. Okay, so there are ways, and this is not addictive. You don't get addicted. You don't become dependent on ketones. That's not how it works. Yet, the best ways we have, apparently, is the SSRI. Even though we have studies showing that just a basic ketogenic diet, and by the way, I think ketogenic diet is not nearly as efficient in doing executing on these positive trends than completely getting rid of carbs altogether, completely getting rid of exogenous carbs, completely getting out the toxins within your body, completely eliminating the exogenous inflammatory factors in your diet. Okay, so we already shown bad diet increases inflammation, decreases the size of the hippocampus, and has negative impact on mental health, and lowers BDNF, which can help repair. All right. On the other side, we now know that diet can increase those factors, We know that fasting can increase BDNF, and fasting mimicking diets like carnivore will increase BDNF, and exercise will increase BDNF. They will increase the size of your hippocampus and drastically help with your mental health disorders. Okay? Weird. All right? Yet, ketone bodies cross the blood-brain barrier. This was talking about earlier. Using, words, monocarboxylate, cool transporters. Maybe I said that correctly. And endothelial cells and astroglia. I don't know what half of that meant. But this is what I'm focused on. Yes, ketone bodies can cross the blood-brain barrier. Okay? Once inside the brain, these ketones can be used by brain cells and respiratory substrates for oxidative metabolic processes. All right? Helping with the metabolic processes. Okay? Through fatty acids. All right? So when you're being put on these low-fat diets and high-carb diets, it's counterintuitive. It's been KBs have been shown to improve brain energy metabolism and may help alleviate neurological and cognitive issues. For example, researchers at the University of Rochester's Del Monte Institute for Neuroscience have found that KBs can help rescue mechanisms in the brain's hippocampal network. It's right there in black and white, literally. KBs may also have potential as therapeutic option for TBI, which many military members have, as they can target secondary injury mechanisms. And just like I talked earlier, yes, brain cells can become insulin resistant. Okay? There is a big relation, in my opinion, of dementia, Alzheimer's, and people who have chronic PTSD. All right? Blood-brain barrier changes, excessive dietary sugar, downregulation of insulin receptors, instability of insulin receptors to bind with insulin, and faulty activation of the insulin signaling cascade. So, guess what causes insulin response? Glucose, androgenous carbs, blood sugar being too high, being toxic and activating insulin to help deal with that. And then becoming insulin resistant in the brain. And yet that's all you're giving to soldiers, right? For the most part, no fresh foods, ultra processed foods, carbs, fiber. You're giving to them as they're dealing with these certain environments. And in addition to that, they come home to the standard American diet, right? And that's all they're getting. And then they're given an SSRI, which is going to mess up these processes. Like an SSRI adds androgenous chemicals to the already out of balance, out of whack physiological symptom that's in place. And you're not treating the cause, you're just trying to treat the symptom. Possible therapeutic approaches to brain insulin resistance include exercise, pharmacological treatments. Exercise can improve brain and hypothalamic insulin sensitivity, and pharmacological treatments may help prevent dementia disorders, obesity, and type 2. Yet we know that ketones do this as well. And maybe just try not inflaming and injuring the brain. Okay? So now, let me digress. We see now this weird conspiracy, this weird connection between what we're doing to soldiers, how we're taking care of them, how the lack of it, rather, the paths that they might go down with cognitive decline and gut decline, and how that gets chronic over time and negatively affects veterans, puts a declination on their health, right? And everything in their life starts to attrition, right? In a negative direction, right? And all the positive things begin to attrition. Okay, so what can we do about it? Because right now the current intervention methods are, the world is better with you in it, here's some chemicals, right? Your brain obviously is out of whack. Let's add some chemicals to that. Let's go ahead and mess with your neurotransmission, your neurotransmitters. Let's not do anything naturally. We, here at Combat Carnivore, strongly believe that we have the best intervention methods to prevent this, to stop it, and to repair it. Okay? With stake strangles and stoicisms, it's that easy. There's no magic elixir. There's no magic supplement. There's no magic medicine that's going to make all this go away. As a matter of fact, your body is the magician. Your body is so apex predator badass that it can fix these problems. Okay? It can. It's designed to. The body is designed to deal with atrocities, designed to deal with traumas. But what's happening is you are not getting, as we learn, the correct nutrients, the correct chemical releases in order to increase those parts that are missing. Okay? Or decrease the parts that are overrun and inflamed, are overwhelmed. We've been hijacked. Literally, it's called like hijacking the amygdala, right? So, with steak, strangles, and stoicism, with the carnivore diet, and I don't want to get too far into it, but with the carnivore diet, with the proper human diet, the diet that we are designed to eat, matches up perfectly, right, with the evidence that we see that helps in repairing and protecting, all right, our neurons, our glands, our lobes, right? We see that evidence. The proper human diet aligns with that. Next, we have Jiu Jitsu, strangles, okay? And I believe that once we are out of those environments, we need to put ourselves back into those environments, simulate combat in a safe environment to help process properly the physiological processes in the brain, okay? Getting you from that hippocampus, right? The swollen amygdala, and stop sending those processes to fight or flight to the hypothalamus, but rather on over and digesting almost over to the prefrontal cortex to allow that to take over, to realize that you are safe. You've made it to the other side. The more you put yourself in that situation, right, the better you start to get, right? The less hijacking takes place, all right? The more memories that your hippocampus remembers that go to a place of being okay rather than a place of stimulating fight or flight, of danger. All right, we're starting to regulate or re-regulate our neurological processes, our physiology, our chemical aspects of the brain. Balance them out. Start getting back to a state of equilibrium and homeostasis, which we need the diet to help with that, create a good home and environment and to allow that to happen physiologically. But now the outside environment is what we need to now help to influence the mind. All right, when you start having a PTSD episode or a panic attack when you're in jiu-jitsu, all right, you have to make it through to the other side to realize that you're okay. You either tap or you learn. And even when you tap, you do learn, okay, a lot. And so I believe that simulating combat in a safe environment with people that you trust, building that camaraderie, building that community with people with that hierarchy that they had in the military is one of the best ways to keep you in that warrior mindset, but allows you to finally become a warrior in a garden, okay? To be peaceful, but at the same time still activating the proper parts of you that are that animalistic part of your brain and naturally and safely going through processes that allow that to be regulated by you. Okay, which is where stoicism comes in. And stoicism allows you the proper processes, or rather the proper formula to help you with practical life philosophies. And I love that. I love that stoicism is non-dogmatic. There's no requirement for belief in anything. You can be any religion and adopt stoicism into your life. And what's amazing about it is it makes you responsible for how you interact with this world. You no longer become a victim of the outside influences and environment, and you no longer are just like a response to those things. You are in control of your responses. You are in control of your emotions and your interactions with the rest of the world. In between stimulus and response, there is space. And in that space is the opportunity to choose. That's a quote from Viktor Frankl, somebody who survived the Holocaust. Very famous for his logotherapy. And I like his logotherapy, which is why I like Stoicism. Okay? So I think it's very important that we build up the three structures properly of mind, body, and soul. The three pillars. The three legs to a stool. They need to be in balance. They need to be in equilibrium. They need to be strong. And those three pillars allow for a structure that allows for the rest of your life to thrive. But they've been crushed. Your diet's been crushed. Your brain has been crushed. Your mind has been crushed. Your soul has been crushed. And you do not have the proper tools, in my opinion, to rebuild them if you're on the current standard American diet and the current medical system right? The current food system, the current insurance system, the current VA system, all right? It's not working in your favor. It's working against you, actually, in my opinion. The current intervention methods are not helping. They're making things worse. I strongly believe with my coaching, without selling you any supplements or anything like this, that we can get you back on track. That being said, thank you so much for being part of this video. Thank you so much for watching. And I hope that we get this message out there. So please like, subscribe, share, comment. Thank you so much, guys. I love you. Remember, don't do drugs and don't eat vegetables.